Hello, Dr. Mann.
Hello.
Hi. Well, thank you so much for being our guest on today's podcast. You have selected 5 important questions that were submitted by a Reddit board called Cults that have been very supportive of this podcast and your work. But before we start, I would like to introduce Dr. Mann to our listeners. And Dr. Cathleen Mann, Ph.D., has consulted in hundreds of cases involving cults, undue influence, psychological influence, and related areas. Qualified by a judge, as an expert in 16 states, she has provided sworn testimony in over 40 legal cases. Her website is cultexpert.net. She also has a Facebook page under facebook.com, Cult Expert. My name is Debra. I am the host and founder of Thinking Agenda, an anti-cult organization based in Orlando, Florida. Our website is cults.com. Dr. Mann, we got some interesting questions for you, so I'm excited to hear your responses as an expert.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's an honor. We're very excited. One question is, what are some overlooked items about cults?
Well, that's a good question. There are many overlooked items. I think most people make an assumption that cults are always religious when they're not. Many cults are political or psychological. In fact, in every human institution, cults have formed. You know, the law, medicine, higher education, psychological theory. Cults are easily found and very common, actually. So I think that's the most overlooked thing, and the thing that the media gets incorrect is that this is somehow about religion or it's about beliefs. It's actually not. And I also think that people tend to overlook the fact that people are deceptively recruited into cults, and nobody joins a cult. Nobody would join a cult. That's why they have to be deceptive in order to get people to affiliate. So those who claim that people join cults are really missing the entire point, and no cult would have any members unless they were deceptive. So all cults are deceptive, and all cults are not religious, I think is the most important thing that people tend to forget. They tend to focus in on beliefs and want to ask me whether a belief is correct or not. And it really doesn't matter to me what you believe in. It matters to me what you do. And the United States Constitution allows you to believe whatever you want, but you're not allowed to do whatever you want in the name of your belief. So those are the most overlooked areas, I think, that people tend to forget. They get all upset with the doctrine, all upset with the teachings, when the teachings are really a very small part of how cults maintain membership.
It also seems that the media likes to zone in on controversy more than what a cult is. You know, they like to zone in on things that are very speculative and are very wild, and so they don't give the right education on cults when it's presented. So
that's one of the biggest problems I have with the media, and one of the reasons that I generally don't talk to the media. I have in the past, but I generally don't seek out the media is because they tend to sensationalize. They tend to mock cult members and make fun of their beliefs, and I just don't think that's necessary. I think we should look at the process. So the media tends to focus way too much on the beliefs as strange and odd, and to treat cult members as if they're stupid when they're not.
Yes, I've noticed that quite a bit, especially with certain cults that have come to the limelight. They really like to sensationalize the salacious parts of the cult and not offer any education or offer any reason. You did mention psychological cults. Is that a rare phenomenon, psychological cults, or is that common?
No, I don't think it's rare. I think that in every human institution, as I said, cults tend to form. And so, in psychology, there certainly has been a lot of theorists that have been cult-like, have acted cult-like, and there still are people within psychology, whether they're teaching or writing or doing YouTube videos, but whatever, they have the tendency to be very cult-like in their recruitment of followers. They have a tendency to be dismissive of any dissent or criticism of their theory, or they believe that their theory is all-encompassing and no one is allowed to disagree with it. I find that really troubling because psychology is supposed to be a science, and as a science, we're supposed to be open and take in other perspectives and use a lot of doubt and dissent in order to move the process along. So, no, it's not rare in psychology. In fact, it's very common. And you find that when you spend any time either teaching or studying in psychology, you run around a lot of cult figures, a lot of people that make themselves into cult leaders, cult of personality.
This next question was the most popular question on Reddit, and it was in different forms, so I'm glad that it's going to be addressed because I think there's a lot of confusion. And that is, when trying to help cult members, is it counterproductive to tell them they are in a cult as it makes them feel attacked and awakens their persecution complex?
Well, I'm not really sure about the persecution complex, but I do think that it is really, it doesn't help matters. In fact, it hurts matters. I don't think you should be telling people they're in a cult because it's just not heard very well. It kind of stops the dialogue. I don't think you should be telling active cult members, well, you're in a cult, wake up, because that's not the way the process works. So I don't advise people to tell others that they're in a cult. First of all, it's pretty judgmental, and I think it's much more important to find out what the definition of a cult is, and perhaps ask them what their definition of a cult is, and see if they have one, because most active cult members that you talk to, if you ask them what a cult is, they can't really tell you. They just know that they're not in one. And so a question I like to ask current cult members is, if you found out you were in a cult, what would you do? So I don't like to use the word cult. I tend to use the word group. So when I'm talking to current cult members, I use the word group to discuss their involvement, because it shuts down dialogue. It's a labeling that evokes a lot of emotional response. It doesn't serve any good purpose. And I just don't think you should be sending books or articles with the word cult in them to people. I think it destroys the trust you may have. And the other term is that mind control is another term I recommend not using, because it doesn't mean anything. I mean, it doesn't have any psychological studies behind it. I prefer the term indoctrination. I think it's much more descriptive of the process. So when you say cult mind control, you're really setting yourself up for an over-emotional reaction. Nobody's going to listen to that. And it just doesn't serve any good purpose. So, mind control is also a very, very hot topic and a word that people tend to use without thinking about it, when in reality, nobody is under mind control. They're under behavior control. So all of the aspects of what the cult is trying to do is trying to get them to change their behavior. So mind control sounds very robotic and
it does
mechanical, and that's not really the process that's going on with current cult members.
So how about now, I think there's more of an intensity if you have a family member in a cult, as opposed to if you maybe work with coworkers that you know is in a cult. So let's say you work with coworkers. that are in a cult, should you not even bring it up, or should you bring it up in the manner you suggested? Because I'm thinking family members you want to keep open, but if you have a lot of coworkers that are in a cult, what would be the best way to communicate, or just not?
Well, I mean, if they want to talk about it, that's fine. I don't think you should force your values or principles on somebody else or try to trick them. If they're trying to recruit you into their group, I think that's another matter entirely. Mm-hmm. But, I don't think that we should take a judgmental position towards other people and think we have the right to tell them that they're under cult mind control. And with family members, I always recommend to families that they keep up communication in a positive way and avoid judging and condemning and telling people that they're in the wrong. Nobody likes to hear that, and so you're not going to have much of a dialogue. I think it's the best approach is to kind of adopt a curious approach, ask questions, be genuinely interested in what they have to say, but at the same time, I think that it's not useful to place yourself in a position of knowing more than they do or treating them as if they're stupid or something, because they're not. They're under deception. And, I've worked in offices. I've worked in lots of different places in my life, and I have encountered people that I think are engaging in cult-like behavior. And unless I see some legal harm or some personal harm to me, it's really none of my business. Unless they're committing fraud or some crime, or they're hurting other people or hurting children, it's none of my business what they're involved in. It's not any of my business to go to them and tell them, gee, you're in a cult. You better get out of it. It doesn't work. And people are allowed to believe whatever they want to believe. Now, when it comes to recruiting other people, that's a different matter. I mean, if they're trying to recruit me, I'm going to have something to say about it. But other than that, just because they affiliate with some group that I think is dubious or deceptive or devious, I mean, unless I'm asked to give my opinion, I generally think it's none of my business.
You don't hear that perspective very often. So that's why I wanted to expand on it in case we get some follow-up questions on it. Okay. I wanted to cover that because you don't hear that perspective from people in your field. So I think that was very important to elaborate on. This question is my favorite, so that's coming up next. What is it like testifying about cults in legal cases?
Well, it's pretty hard. It's pretty stressful. A lot of hard work. It's not fun. It's very challenging, and I think people think it's an easy way to make money, and it's really not. I mean, you have to not only know the facts of the case pretty deeply, and you have to know what the issues are. You have to make sure that you are testifying based on research, actual research, not your own made-up theory, but maybe some actual research. You can cite the research. But I think one of the most important things that people don't realize is that when you're testifying, you have to be able to be as neutral as you possibly can. And I think people think you're supposed to be an advocate. No, you're supposed to be neutral and give the science and the research that we do have. And part of being neutral is that you need to know the research on the other side. I mean, there's plenty of people that claim that cults don't exist, that there's no such thing as indoctrination. And you need to be able to cite the research from there and to say, give evidence about whether or not you've seen that in your evaluation of the group. Because just to say that the other side is wrong is not good enough. You have to be a scientist. You have to be someone who is able to see the issue in context. And Another problem is that people think you can just go in there and give some general synopsis of the group, and that's false. I mean, you have to be able to tie the specific facts of this case with the specific area, problem, behaviors of the group in question. So you can't just go in there and make a universal condemnation of everybody who joins a group, because not everyone's experience is the same. I mean, if you're in Scientology, not everybody's experience is exactly the same. And for people to say that it's the worst cult that ever lived is just false. Because there are people that had a brief encounter. There are people that have been there for a short time. There are people that have been there a long time. Everybody's had a different experience. And that's the same thing with cults, regardless of what it is that not everyone has been traumatized. And that's the hardest thing it is for me to convey to people, is just because you were in a cult group doesn't mean you're a trauma survivor. I think that it depends on the person. It depends on the group. It depends on the intensity of your experience. But not everybody has a bad experience. I mean, some people actually have a rather benign experience and come out and just move on. So I think it's false to make everything pathological, to make everything subject to, deprogramming or whatever, and to say that that's the only solution. It's not. And so when you're in court, you have to be able to be objective and say, yes, these are the practices that this group engages in, and yes, this is how, for example, if it's child custody matter, you would say this is how these practices are affecting the child, how this is affecting their development. And you really can't do that without evaluating the child. And in terms of civil cases or criminal cases, such as fraud or some kind of a criminal act, one of the hardest things to do is for people who have been in destructive groups, who have been in cults, they're kept at a level of no awareness, and by the time they get up to a level where they can see the deception and see the fraud that's going on, they're generally participating in the fraud. So it's really hard to sue the cult for fraud when you were participating in that fraud. So
I see,
I generally don't recommend to people that they sue their cults for fraud, because how did you know that they're engaging in fraud unless you were a part of it or helping to further it? So, there's a personal cost, and, whenever you're involved in a lawsuit, everything about your life comes into play. It's not just one-sided, and I think people forget that in a legal case, everything is open, everything is transparent, everything is subject to examination. So I think people think that you go into court and you just get up there and talk about how bad cult is. That's not the way it works. I mean, attorneys, especially those who work for the group or who are representing the group member, have a tendency to be very ruthless and very hard on you. So you better know exactly what you're talking about, because they will do anything, fair or unfair.
Do they examine your personal life as well? Like, do they go into your personal life or anything you've posted on social media? Is that highlighted?
Absolutely. Everything that I say and do and post is subject to being cross-examined. And so, I have a tendency to be very careful. I'm not going to post political opinions. I'm not going to post advice to people. I'm not going to brag about the cases that I've worked on, because everything is open and transparent. So I have a tendency to be very careful about what I say and do, knowing that everything I say and do is subject to being brought into court, and has been. I mean, I've had many instances where people have brought in postings that I've made and used them as evidence, and that's perfectly fair. It's all in the public domain. So people that like to talk about themselves and all of the wonderful things that they've done and their group experience need to remember that all of this is subject to cross-examination.
Wow.
So they need to be sure they're telling the truth all the time, for one thing, and two, they need to realize that this can be used against them.
So I didn't even realize that. That's amazing. And also, I don't think that people know at all how multi-layered it is to be an expert and the educational requirements that's needed, because what bothers me is I see the word cult expert thrown around and people are claiming it, and it's not, that's not what it is. You have to have a high degree of education. You have to have a scientific analysis of things. You have to be neutral, as you say, and your whole life is affected by by this profession, and people just don't realize it. So when I see that word tossed around, it's agitating, because it shows there's no reality attached to that.
It's really easy to give yourself a title of cult expert.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a self-ascribed title. I mean, the only time it really has any meaning is if a judge qualifies you after a process and says that you're an expert. That's somebody in authority who works in the legal system that makes a decision, and you have a hearing. You don't just get to walk in there and automatically be assumed. You have a hearing that you qualify as an expert, and if you do, you do. If not, then you're not allowed to testify as one.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mann, for that explanation, because I don't think very few of us have any idea what it takes to do the kind of job you do. So I thank you for...
And I just wanted to say, there are legitimate cult experts out there that have been qualified in a court of law, and I'm not referring to them. There are some that have had that happen, so they're not the ones I'm talking about. I'm just talking about people that have absolutely no experience in forensic matters and never testified in court, but want to call themselves a cult expert. Mm-hmm. Those are the people that have assigned themselves that title. It's not been given to them by a higher authority.
That's very important to emphasize, because especially if people need a cult expert, they need to know these facts. So I'm glad that you were able to elaborate on that, and we really appreciate the selfless work that you do. So the next question is very interesting, too. Why do so many people believe they could never be sucked into a cult and or harmful organization?
Well, it's just pride and hubris, in the sense that people tend to, of course, believe that they're smarter than they are. They think that their intelligence, whatever it is going to protect them. But what they forget is that cults recruit using emotional methods. So to say that your intelligence is going to protect you, or your intelligence is somehow going to prevent you from believing, first of all, they don't present their true purpose up front. So, mm-hmm. and they do discourage the use of your thinking, saying that it's your ego, or you need to let your ego go. So they appeal to you on an emotional level. And if you spent your life thinking that you're too intelligent for certain things to happen, that actually places you more at risk, not less at risk, because cults use persuasive methods that are pretty sophisticated most of the time. They isolate you from reality. They tell you things that sound really, really good, because if they didn't isolate you and use deception, no one would ever affiliate. And so they do that because they're not going to appeal to your intelligence. So your intelligence actually doesn't really help you very much. And not only that, I think that people forget that if you're sleep deprived, and that's one of the things that these groups use very, very well. If you're sleep deprived, I don't care how intelligent you are, you're going to make bad decisions.
That's true.
And so your intelligence is not going to protect you. Now, critical thinking will help you out, but only to a certain point. You have to know how to recognize appeals to emotions, how your emotions are manipulated. And you also need to ask yourself, what does this person have that makes them qualified to be a teacher, or what makes them qualified to be a guru? I mean, what are their credentials? And these are all fair questions. When I work on legal cases, one of the things I prefer to do, if possible, I always request, I want to ask if I can interview with a cult leader. I mean, that is if it's a group that has a living cult leader, and if it's someone that I haven't met already for some reason. But in the past, I have requested meetings with cult leaders, just wanting to interview them, and sometimes I've been able to do so. And they're just so much out of practice with anyone questioning them that they don't take it very well. And, you know, they're all hung up on titles, and they want me to call them by certain titles. And,
do you do that?
I'm happy to call you whatever you want me to call you within reason, but it only can be a maximum of 2 words. I mean, I'm not going to call you Your Holiness, the Great Supreme.
I was going to ask you that, yeah.
Just 2-word limit, and I'll call you whatever you want me to call you. But, you know, other than that, they need to be reasonable about it. I'm not going to engage in any cult practices. I'm not going to bow. I'm not going to genuflect or do anything like that. I'm just going to talk to you person to person. If they can't handle that, then the interview doesn't go well. I mean, sometimes
is that unsettling, though, to interview a cult leader, because you're dealing with possibly a very, a very psychologically charged situation? Is that
no? It's not really. It's not really that distressing to me. I mean, I just think that they're just like anybody else. I mean, just because they say there's something doesn't mean they are. So, no, I've interviewed several cult leaders that have been pretty successful, and I don't find it intimidating at all. In fact, I find it pretty easy to rattle them from the first few minutes. I mean, because I'm not worshipful enough, or I'm not acting in a way that they're used to. So I'm not disrespectful, but at the same time, I'm going to talk to them pretty directly. And you know, if they want to show me their truth, I'm happy to hear it. Let's hear it.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to be recruited upon. I mean, if they want to talk about it in some kind of a real way, you know, it'll be fine. But they're not going to try to recruit me, because if they do, I'm going to stop. So no, it's not really all that different from counseling people that have psychological problems. I've met a lot of people that are pretty pathological in my counseling practice. So I'm not really finding anything all that unusual. In fact, the vast majority of them are, you know, it's very anticlimactic in the sense that they're really not all that interesting. So
that's fascinating.
You know, a lot of the time I'm not allowed to interview. I know that the Jehovah's Witnesses in particular, I've requested meetings with their eldership whenever I go into a case with the Jehovah's Witnesses, which I think I've worked in 7 or 8 legal cases involving them. I've always requested to speak to the elder of the particular witness congregation, and have never been allowed to because of my gender. And, you know, because as a woman, I'm automatically in error. I've been told that they can't give me an honest interview because as a female, I'm subordinate to them. So, you know, even though I request an interview with the eldership, I never have gotten one. And that's been the reason that they've given me.
That's interesting.
I mean, it's my gender. There's nothing I can do about it. I can't change it. And so, you know, they're either going to have to deal with me as an equal or not at all. And they just don't. They use it as an excuse not to interview.
That's very interesting, especially the part about interviewing cult leaders. I guess that was particularly interesting to me. Have you ever interviewed any female cult leaders? You don't have to mention it.
I have.
Okay.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. Two, you know, and, you know, it's not gone well. I mean, when I interviewed Jay-Z Knight of the Ramtha group, RSE, She was just completely irritated with me from the minute I walked in the room. So, it's just a combination of their willingness to interview somebody, to be interviewed by somebody that's not a member of their group.
She comes off like such an aggressive person, so I wouldn't think she would be very congenial with an interview from an expert.
Well, and to understand it from her point of view, I mean, she's been very successful.
Mm-hmm.
Jay-Z Knight has been incredibly successful, and she has millions and millions of dollars and has thousands of followers. And there's absolutely no reason, there's no self-interest for her to interview with somebody like me. I mean, she just doesn't have any interest. There's nothing she can gain from doing that, and everything to lose, and she just can't be bothered. It just was completely irritating to her. And I understand her position. I mean, she's been very successful, been around a long time.
Yeah, she has been.
And so, I'm just nothing to her, and so she's not really interested in. Even though I requested an interview, just really wasn't going to have it. There wasn't really no reason to.
Well, that's fascinating. I find her I find her kind of a very interesting character in the cult world. So I like to follow what she's doing.
Quite an actress. She is. She's got quite a show going on there. And, she's interesting in the fact that she's been very successful for a long time. And she has thousands and thousands of followers.
She does, yeah.
And so, you have to look at the dynamic is, what is it that she's doing that's keeping her successful?
Well, she definitely has a complex system of ideology that seems to draw many different facets of people in. And
well, no, that may be true, but she's really a cult of personality. She's really an attraction.
She is.
And she's quite charismatic and quite stunning in person. So, I can understand the attraction. And I can understand the show and the theater and all the rest of it. Her doctrine, the teachings she has are mostly nonsensical. Mm-hmm. You can read those online. She posts 15,000 times a day. If you're hooked into her, and she's not actually doing the posting. She's got her followers doing it, but she's a very fascinating person in the sense that she's been quite successful for dozens of years, and that's something we should be studying. We should be studying what is it that makes some cult members or cult leaders successful, and what makes some fail. Mm-hmm. What is the quality about them that they have? And people like to say it's charisma, and I don't really think that's it. I think that charisma has a part of it.
Has a part of it.
But there's much more to the dynamic. When you meet someone like Jay-Z Knight, yes, she's charismatic, but that only goes so far. She's quite appealing, but that doesn't last very long in a one-on-one situation. The only other female cult leader that I think was charismatic was Elizabeth Clare Prophet. She certainly was appealing and very, very charismatic.
She was, yeah.
But, she also was very uncomfortable talking about anything other than what she believed in. Mm-hmm. So if you tried to stray onto another topic beyond what the teachings were, she wasn't interested in having a conversation with you. So, she can dominate the conversation. If she can, intimidate you or dominate you, I mean, that's why she was successful, and she was successful for 30 years. And that's something we should look at. What is it about these leaders that makes them successful? I mean, if they're really, really noxious and horrible, terrible people, as a lot of people try to make them out to be, why are they appealing? It can't be just gullible people deciding to follow them. There's much more to the dynamic than that. And
that's true.
People simplify it and try to make it sound, well, you're
like it's a formula.
You're stupid to follow Jay-Z Knight. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, no, you're not. I mean, she's actually got a lot of things that work in her favor, and she's very emotional and very persuasive, and she's very good at what she does. So we should be looking at that.
Especially, like, there's a lot of differences between Elizabeth Clare Prophet and J.Z. Knight. They're very much, so that's interesting as well, that there's no formula, and that's a very interesting perspective.
I'm not really sure there's a whole lot of difference, except that, they both sort of played in the same ballpark. But the only difference I think I would say would be that I've met both, certainly, and talked to both. And I would say that the difference would be, if there was any difference, is that Elizabeth Clare Prophet was a little bit more entertaining, or she was a little bit more interested in her physical appearance, where Jay-Z, when she's channeling, so she becomes a man. Yeah. That's really kind of odd and strange. So that's really the only difference. But in terms of charisma, they have some equivalence, yes, certainly.
Yeah, it's interesting with the female cult leaders. It really is.
They're very rare, but there have been several, that have been quite successful, and most of them are charismatic, and most of them are very sexual or seductive. That's the thing I think I noticed the most about the most similar thing between J.Z. Knight and Elizabeth Clare Prophet is that they're both very seductive in person.
I saw Elizabeth Clare Prophet more as more innocent than J.Z. Knight, though, in terms of, in the perspective, in my layman's perspective, I see her more motherly. I see J.Z. Knight being more
she tried to be, but she certainly wasn't innocent. But she tried to be the universal mother. That's the way she viewed herself. People called her mother, and so she kind of took on that persona, but that doesn't mean she was motherly or maternal. She wasn't. She's very, 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 very strong and very, very much into power and glory, etc. But there are some similarities in the sense that both were sexually seductive.
Yes, there's some current, alleged cult leaders that seem to follow that pattern as well. But anyway. This is interesting, this next question. Thank you for answering that previous question in such depth, because I think we really need to hear that. And that is, could a YouTube personality be described as a cult of personality? And what comes to my mind is Jordan Peterson, who really rose up. But, he actually always welcomed criticism, so I don't know if he would really apply. I think it was more of a general popularity with him, but he actually always took on criticism and welcomed it, so I don't know if he would apply to this, except that he was popular.
Well, he's not someone that comes to mind. There are cults on the Internet, certainly. One of the best known is a cult called Quickstar, which is actually Amway, but has morphed into a online system called Quickstar. But there are others. There are other people that have cult-like qualities that they try to create a cult of personality on YouTube or whatever. How successful they are is questionable. A lot of people try to be cult leaders, but not all of them are successful. And part of it is because they have to be able to translate something that people want. And even though I've heard examples of people being cult-like or cult personalities on YouTube, I don't really know of any except for Quickstar. I can't think of any. I think that what happens is that YouTube tends to be an adjunct to someone's in-person practice or in-person group or whatever. And so I think, people can be recruited, certainly, online. I do know of one group in particular that I've worked with that does all of its recruiting online, but they actually, once they recruit you, they make you go to a place where they are. And they're actually in Colorado. I've been involved in 2 legal cases, 3 or 4 now, called Servants of the Holy Family, which is an ultra-traditionalist Roman Catholic cult that is here right in Colorado Springs, and they recruit online. That's where they get the bulk of their membership from. And, of course, on their website where they're talking, they're not telling the truth about their organization. They're not telling about the controversy or anything like that. They're making it sound like something other than what it is. But they do use YouTube exclusively to recruit because they're an isolated community. They don't go out and recruit on the street or anything.
That's a good point, because I know on the Reddit board we got a lot of questions from the ex-Catholics forum regarding are there some branches of Catholicism that are cults. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because that was a very frequent question that we also got.
In all the major religions, all the 5 major religions, there are cults within. There certainly are cults within the Catholic Church. And by that I mean, there are, the word Catholic means universal. So for people to say Catholic, I always ask them, well, what do you mean? Because there are other Catholic churches besides the Roman Catholic Church. So just talking about the Roman Catholic Church, of course there are cults within the Roman Catholic Church. There's Opus Dei, there's Regnum Christi, the Legionnaires of Christ, many other examples of cults within the organization. The same thing that goes for Buddhism. There's cults within Buddhism. There's cults within all major religions. Christianity, Protestants, LDS. There's cults. The FLDS,